Would pre-Hispanic cultures have gotten along with the heroes of Mexican independence? We will find it below. Between 1521, the Germans incorrectly considered the conquest of Mexico, and 1821, the year the so-called Mexican independence was achieved, there are 3,000 years of distance. The official story, promoted by all governments, presents historical figures as united, as if they were a single person fighting for the same ideas. But they never explained all the negative aspects behind it. Before the arrival, there were various groups of the continent. Some were nomads, others had large cities, while others mixed and disputed. They had different systems of government, commerce, religion, and justice, as well as internal conflicts like any social group. However, in general, they had nothing to envy from the European civilizations of that time. We all know what happened next. These cultures were subdued for the next 300 years, and much of their way of life was revived. There are also more racial mixing, but still the majority of the population were descendants of those who lived before 1521. By 1810, however, there was a new social class, the Spaniards, who divided themselves into criollos, those born on the continent to Spanish parents, the Peninsulares, Spaniards born in Spain, who came to the continent only to get rich and hold positions of power before returning to Spain. Ironically, those who initiated the independence movement were mostly criollos and Peninsulares. For instance, Hidalgo, Morelos, Allende, Iturbide, and La Corregidora were children or descendants of Spaniards, even though criollos were seen as second class by the Peninsulares. Many of them held better positions than the majority of the population as they had access to education, owned property or wealth, or held military positions, opportunities very few people had at the time. Their inability to hold higher office and world power was a key part of their dissatisfaction with the Spanish crown. Having explained the situation back then, it's worth comparing the pre-Hispanic groups to these inhabitants of what was then called New Spain. Although the pre-Hispanic groups were not perfect societies, they were organized in various ways and did not need foreign structures to exist. On the other hand, the so-called heroes of independence were a product of the conquest. Without it, they wouldn't exist. For instance, Hidalgo and Iturbide were relatives, sharing a common ancestors who was one of the Spaniards who helped conquer Tenochtitlan. And when you consider that the main decision of the 11-year War of Independence were made by the children of Spaniards, like the conspiracy of La Profesa, where criollo Spaniards and clearly members decided to break away from Spain, it's clear that the pre-Hispanic groups would have had little in common with these figures. Pre-Hispanic groups had their own leaders and made their own decisions independently. In contrast, during the War of Independence, the descendants of these groups did not participate in the high-level decision-making of the various insurgent and Spanish leaders. These ancient cultures had their own belief systems, worshipping deities like Tlaloc, Quetzalcoatl, Chac, or Cosijo. However, 300 years later, after syncretic mixes, Catholicism became the dominant religion. Unlike the pre-Hispanic groups, who could assimilate external elements into their beliefs, the independence leaders never considered respecting these ancient beliefs. For them, there would only be Catholicism and mindset the left clearly record. For instance, Hidalgo took up the banner of the Virgin of Guadalupe, shouting, "Long live the Virgin of Guadalupe," in the town of Dolores. This virgin was invented precisely to replace the beliefs of Moctezuma and his people. Many insurgent fighters like Morelos, Hidalgo, and Mariano Matamoros were Catholic priests who had not doubted that Catholicism was the only acceptable religion. This imposition is recorded in writing, like in Morelos' Sentiments of the Nation, where he stated in several articles. Second, that the Catholic religion is the only one, without tolerance for any other. Fourth, that the dogma must be upheld by the Church's hierarchy, which includes the Pope, the bishops, and the priests, as all plants not planted by God must be uprooted. 90. That a constitutional law should establish the celebration of December 12th in all towns, dedicated to the patroness of our liberty, the Blessed Virgin of Guadalupe, with all towns urged to observe monthly devotions. So, there was little religious tolerance, and the beliefs of Cuitláhuac, Pacal, and others had no place among these heroes. On the other hand, for several reasons, the independence leaders complained about abuse against them, as well as indigenous masses who made up the majority. However, many of them actually wanted the Spanish king to keep ruling, as Napoleon Bonaparte had dethroned him. Hidalgo himself shouted "Long live King Ferdinand VII" in Dolores, Mexico. At least, in the beginning, also fought for the king, though he later changed his mind and then tried to prove his loyalty to the king when he was judged. Differences in thought even caused conflicts between Morelos and Hidalgo's right-hand man, Ignacio López Rayón, who believed that when the Spanish king returned, they should remain loyal to him. Even Iturbide, who ultimately achieved independence, thought similarly as shown in the Treaty of Córdoba, where it is stated that Ferdinand VII, or all members of the Spanish royal family, should continue to rule Mexico. For this reason, I always emphasize our independence, in quotation marks, since many of the beliefs of the independence heroes sought to maintain the Spanish king as ruler. Pre-Hispanic cultures will not have needed that king at all. In some ways, what the independent heroes achieved would have helped pre-Hispanic cultures reclaim their belief systems against the colonial and independentist system. This is mentioned in the signature of the Act of Independence, where it says, "The Mexican nation, which for 300 years has neither had its own will not the free use of the voice, emerged today from the oppression in which it has lived." The sentiment was never intended to include the indigenous groups of 300 years earlier, after groups had different ways of thinking and believing 300 years ago, which were stolen from them. They could now return to their ancient worldview, as they are recognized to have had their own will and vision, which had nothing to do with that of independence leaders. While these ancient groups often fought among themselves, even their disputes depended on them, not on a European king. Although the independence heroes also benefited in some way from their oppression. Throughout independence, many of the leaders in the army, society, and the church sought to exercise power directly themselves, rather than the peninsulares. Later, of course, other lines of thought and governments emerged, resulting in disaster and internal conflicts among the independence leaders themselves. So, would pre-Hispanic groups had independence leaders have gotten along? The truth is, no, because both sides had different beliefs, lifestyles, societies, and gods. Pre-Hispanic groups could have even demanded the return of what the ancestors of the independence heroes had taken from them. And just as it happened after independence, even the descendants of these groups have increasingly lived in neglect, which didn't just happen during colonial times, but continued after independence. That's why, if they were face to face, it's likely the Nezahualcóyotl would have fought with Father Hidalgo.